And I don't know what words were said. I just remember like we were in the living room. I remember my mom wasn't in the room. She was in a different room. And I remember all of us coming in to her room after that. And she was like on the couch. And by that time, a lot of her like functioning, just her like, she would say stuff, but it wouldn't come out the way she would want to say it. And I remember us like crying and hugging her. And she looked at my dad. She's like, "What's wrong?" Like, didn't know really what was going on. And he goes, your children just love you. That's all he said.
Hey, welcome to another episode of The Day After. On today's episode, we have Ashely joining us, who shares her story of losing her mom at a young age. And we go deep into trying to define grief. It's an amazing discussion. We are grateful for Ashely for sharing with us, educating us, and enlightening us. Grab your coffee, grab your tea, your kombucha, your water, whatever. Sit back and enjoy. And if you haven't yet, please go rate and review the show on wherever you listen to podcasts. It would greatly help us and goes a long way to supporting the show. Thank you and enjoy. So let's start a little bit about kind of your story with grief.
Yeah.
And the person you lost, and tell us a little bit about that.
So when I was 12, I lost my mother. She was 48. And I lost her to brain cancer. It was, terminal illness right off the bat. She started losing vision in one of her peripherals, and went in for like a routine thing. And 6 months later, she died. So it was 2 days after Christmas, which was extra hard and makes Christmas every year a little bit extra hard. But yeah, it wasn't interesting time with grief because no one was really guiding me through it as a kid. And I think that was, I like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. It was just from them trying to grieve for themselves. And, when you're 12, you don't even really know what that is or what it should look like.
Yeah.
I had lost a grandparent, one grandparent before that, but I was pretty little. And I remember my grandfather, like hearing that he died and going to the funeral, but I was just so little that you're just like, okay, like this is normal, or this isn't a big thing. So, I really actually didn't grieve until I was about 30 years old. So about 18 years after my mother died, I finally dealt with the grief. And it definitely came out in other ways between, 12 and 30. It manifests in a few different
Did you have siblings?
ways. Yeah, I have two older sisters.
Did you guys talk about it as siblings? Did you guys
we never discussed it as a family at all. We would discuss like happy moments. Like remember when mom used to do this or cook this, or remember that one time we were camping and she started a grape war. And yeah, we just like remember like the funny moments. And I think my family usually deflects with humor a lot of the time. I think I've picked that up also.
Me too.
Relate to that.
Yeah.
Me too.
It does help. It does help. It's one of the better coping mechanisms, but eventually it catches up to you.
Yeah.
But we never talked about it as a family. So I remember one therapist I went to, he goes, "So the biggest thing you all went through, you never talk about." I'm like, correct. That's true.
What prompted you to kind of go and start talking about it? I think you mentioned, and maybe in our pre-call, that you kind of started seeing a therapist, and that's when you first, because he asked you like, how did you grieve the loss of your mom? And you were like,
I was like,
I don't know.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So it was exactly that. I was in marriage counseling from a previous marriage, and there was something like that wasn't wrong in my marriage. There was something that I felt was wrong that I could not put my finger on. And a couple of years before that, I grew up in church and everything, but kind of like went my own way, like during college. And then a couple of years before that, I like came back to my faith. And then when I started marriage counseling, and in this moment specifically of, my counselor asked me, how did I grieve my mother's death? It was prompted by the fact that I felt God had disappeared completely. I'm just like, there's something wrong. Like, I don't know what it is. So he asked me a series of questions. And at the end, he's like, so tell me about how you grieved your mother's death when you were a kid. And I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, the words he was asking me just did not make sense. I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like. I'm like, I had to have, right? It's been like almost 20 years. Like,
right.
Yeah.
I must have done that somehow. But I think grief is a lot more active than we give it credit for. It just doesn't happen. You kind of have to walk into it and white knuckle it and go through it.
In that moment when he asked you and you kind of had that realization of like, I don't know that I did, how did you feel about that?
I was kind of like, oh shit, here we go. Like, this is gonna happen. Like, this is it. Like, we're gonna get into it. And like, by the end of that session, we kind of figured out, like, quote unquote, what was wrong. And then I had to leave, and I was like, what do I do with this information? And so he actually gave me a book suggestion of C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed. I don't know if you've ever read that. It's really powerful. It is his journey his journals after he lost his wife, and kind of like his battle with God. And it's very raw. It's like, for, as big of an author that he is, both just, globally, but also in the Christian community, like, it felt so comforting to see someone like that raw and undone and being like, what the heck is going on?
Right. So you said this was like 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So in between 12 and 22 or early 20s, and you look back on it, like, presumably you've gone through some of that grief, and I want to talk about that, but like, in those years, that decade, which are pretty formidable years, how do you view it looking back now as like, oh, I see some of these behaviors or some of these coping mechanisms that I did to try to help with the grief that was really unacknowledged?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So I look back on like that girl at 12, and like, I feel like pretty bad for her that she did not have the support that she needed at the time. I remember, oh my gosh, this one time stands out, in middle school, like shortly after my mom passed, that there was some girl that our group of girls had some beef with, and vice versa, and we're like butting heads for some reason. And it got back to me that it was said, oh, Ashley's just mad because her mom died. And I was like went off. And what do you do in middle school? You go to the principal, because, they're supposed to solve everything. So I went down to the principal, and she was not a compassionate woman. So she brought me and this other girl into her office, and she points at me, and she goes, you leave her alone in her business. She goes, and she points at the other girl, and she goes, and you leave her alone with her dead mother. And I was like, oh my God.
No.
Thanks, Miss Smith.
No.
I'll take that. It was just like, I didn't see anyone handling it well around me. So I was like, okay, like, if this adult doesn't feel like it's a big deal, it can't be a big deal to me. And I think that's kind of like how I went about my years during that time, because, like, as I mentioned, like, my faith is really important to me. I grew up in church, and the adults around me, when my mom was sick, she was only sick for 6 months before she died. And the adults around me, were praying for a miracle and hoping for one. And that was a lot of what I heard and experienced. And when it didn't happen, when that miracle didn't happen, I didn't have any explanation other than, she's a Christian, she's with Jesus, and it was put on the shelf. Yeah. And was what informed me making grief not such a serious thing.
Right. How did your dad react to all of that? Like, what do you remember him and that kind of energy that he brought to that grief? And like, now all of a sudden he's a single dad with three teenage girls.
Yeah. So My oldest sister was at college. My middle sister was a junior in high school, and I was in 7th grade. And it's hard. A lot of this stuff is like still a black hole where I had to like go back and like ask my dad, like, what happened during the 6 months and what happens in 6 months after, because I have like no information. I was like piecing together stuff, so I've asked a little bit, but my dad wasn't well. He was keeping it together for us. And when I was 30, like during therapy sessions, my therapist was like, can you ask your dad stuff? I'm like, I don't think I want to. He goes, why not? I'm like, I don't want to make him sad. He goes, okay. And then like I worked up the courage to do that, and I'm like, oh man, I don't want to cry, but we might get there. So I worked up the courage to ask my dad. I'm like, Dad, why did we never talk about Mom's death? And he goes, I didn't want to make anyone sad. I'm like, oh, I am your daughter. Like, okay, like this is very relatable. So that's why it wasn't talked about. But yeah, he was really sad. I remember the morning when he told us and him crying, and I remember my birthday, which came about like 3 months afterwards. And I remember it was kind of like the first like holiday since my mom was gone was my birthday. And like, I remember him being really upset through that as well. So I think he tried to keep a lot of his grief to himself, not knowing what it would do to us. But in the same respect, it really felt like that we were walking alone in our grief and being, guided through it ourselves, which, wasn't a good thing either.
It's interesting you say like your response to, can you ask your dad, is I don't want him to be sad, is my kids say that all the time to me.
Yeah.
They're like, no, just be happy. Like, I just want you to be happy. And we were watching a video, like last summer or something, and it was with me and Ariana at the table, and I was just laughing. And my daughter's like, she's like, you used to just be so happy. You used to just laugh. And it was like last month or something, I was crying in front of them. And they're like, wow, I've never seen you cry. And I was like, wait, that's your perspective? I'm like, because I cry nearly every day in front of them. I'm like, how is it that they can't see that? So it always concerns me when I hear people who've lost parents and have since grown up of like, what am I doing that's not acknowledging, or how I'm acknowledging it, or I'm not acknowledging it. But
we've talked to like loads of people, but there's no manual on how parents are supposed to help their kids through grief, right? My dad, we talked to him in episode 1, and we were in support groups growing. And so they were, one I think was related to our church, if I'm not mistaken. Like it had like Catholic undertones, if you will. So like they kind of said like mom's in heaven versus something that's not. But I remember like that kind of helped. I think we made like prayer boxes, and to your point, it was like my dad, I don't think he necessarily talked about my mom passing at home, but we did talk about it there. So it was like, that was like the space where we talked about it. And also he might disagree with that, which rightfully so. I was like only 9. So this is what I remember. But there's not a right way and there's not a wrong way. Cause I feel like every time it's like the parent is always doing what they thought was best, like your dad just didn't want to make people sad. And like, I totally get that, because that's how I am like now, you don't want to bring it up, or but actually it would have helped, in retrospect, you're like, that would have helped me. That would have helped me to talk about it, to have memories. And I'm totally the one in my family that like, it was like my mom's 50th birthday, and I'm like, we're celebrating, we're having a party.
See, that's who I am now. I'm like, all right, like we're all gonna talk about it, and still people are like, no.
Yeah.
Even your sisters don't want to?
I've talked to my sisters. I can talk to my sisters. I'm really close with them. I don't really know their personal stories of how they've grieved. But so I don't want to speak to that. But, I can talk to them about, missing her for like future things. I think that's such a weird part of losing someone as a kid, that you miss them for things that haven't even happened yet. Yeah, it's like really, really a weird thing. And like, that would have been so great to like share with my sisters, because we're, you know, we're in the same boat with that. We've all like collectively lost our mother. Yeah, a lot of that just wasn't talked about. There's been some times where I've talked to them individually, but there aren't really any ways that we collectively like remember her, which kind of sucks.
Do you celebrate like, I mean, what we call the death anniversary or anything like that? Okay, yeah.
So I do. I write, as well as you know, not really blog, but you know, just really long captions on Instagram. I guess that's a good way to put it. The ones that have to be continued in the comments. Yeah. So I do some writing, and I'll write a post like for my mom on, you know, like her birthday or, you know, her death anniversary. It's a little bittersweet because my, not my mom dying, that's totally bitter, but it's a little bittersweet because my husband's birthday is actually on my mother's death anniversary, which is really interesting. You know, the first year we were dating, I like didn't tell him that. I'm like, let's just celebrate your birthday. Yeah. And like try not to. He's like, why didn't you tell me that? Oh my
gosh. So it's really December 27th, his birthday?
27th, yeah. Yeah.
Man, what is it with all these Decembers? Like,
yeah.
We just talked to somebody, and I believe their person died on December 23rd.
Wow.
That was Ariana's birthday, was December 23rd.
Wow.
Yeah.
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 December, man.
Yeah.
So I want to like, so get back to this. Yeah. You're in therapy and they say, so how have you grieved your mom? That's kind of earth shattering, right? It's like the way you described it is like, I just had like this image in my head of like, you're now at a cliff and someone's pushing you off and you're like, wait, where's the parachute? Like what happens like when you go forward in that and start dealing with it?
Oh man. So more therapy, definitely. But the day I left there, I was kind of like, okay, like this is happening. You could just feel that like something was shifting. You're like, this is not going to be easy, or my life is not going to look the same after this. And it really hasn't. But like the moment I left, like I was just looking to solve it. I was looking to solve grief. I was looking to do it and do it well, and get an A+ on grief, and like, you know, in the right amount of time, and, you know, present it back to my therapist in a week being like, I did it. Like I did all the stages, and it's great. So I went out and I bought, you know, the C.S. Lewis book that he suggested, and I went through it and I like marked it up, and it was great. And then I came back for a second session of therapy, and I'm like, oh, I don't know when this is going to end. You know, I don't know. And for me, it was 6 months of therapy with this therapist, but also just like a lot of dark moments, thoughts, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to be on this planet, just finding very little support in the people around me. I'm not talking about my family, but just in my ex-husband at the time. You know, I asked him one time, I'm like, hey, can I tell you how my mom died? I've really never told anyone before. He goes, no. I'm like,
what?
Just straight up no. And I was like,
wow.
All right. So,
message received. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine that. I would be like, okay.
I'm going to talk to a wall, I guess.
I'll just go tell myself.
It was, I just look in the mirror and tell myself what I already know. So it was a lot of like journaling. Like my therapist had me like write notes as my 12-year-old self to my mom. And like, they were kind of cruel. Like I remember like starting out being like, what the F? Like I am 12. I haven't even got my period yet, and you're not here. Like this is not okay. And it was just like those type of things, like all the stuff that like she was missing or that she had missed. And those letters were really helpful in processing what I was actually feeling. Cause I mean, it's kind of like, she was a great mom, but man, I was so mad that she wasn't here.
I did have very similar feelings. Although I also had that at like the other facet of like grieving, like my parents, well, my dad, I mean, and even my family to this day is like, goes to church and like just really, really faithful. And I feel like I lost a little bit of that in the process. Like I went to this, I did youth group. Like my dad really wanted me to do that. And I've invited some friends along to make it a social event. That's how I do.
What else is youth group?
Yeah.
That's what I know.
And I went to this like conference in like Missouri. And it was like their annual youth convention or whatever. And I just remember coming back and like they asked me at church to like say something about it. And I was just like, after my mom died, I was like so angry. Like I did not understand like why this could happen to such a good person if, you know, God like is this great thing. And that the conference actually did shift that perspective a little bit. I don't think I've come like, you know, a whole 180 or 360 or whatever, but I do kind of, I don't know. I wish that I had a little bit stronger. I wish that faith was something that was like stronger for me that I could like, but it's like something, I don't know why. It's just like I had a friend's mom recently died and like very young, too young. And for reasons that, you know, don't even make sense for someone that never like drank and smoked and stuff. And I'm just like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, how does that happen? So it's like always like faith, that anger is like that one thing that I always came back to. But it's journaling and journaling has helped me immensely with that and writing that out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that anger is real. And that's one of the things was one of my coping things through, like, I was an angry kid even before my mom died for some reason. There's many stories. One of his like strangling a turkey sub and shoving it in the glove compartment because it was the wrong order. Yeah. Chill for like an 8-9-year-old. So there's always that underlying like base anger that I had, but it was definitely like amplified when my mom died. But it came out in just weird ways. And I was angry. Yeah, I was definitely angry at God. I was angry at my mom for a little bit. I was definitely angry at my family. And man, yeah, it really, I don't even want to say tested my faith because I don't even really know what a faith of a 12-year-old like was. I was kind of like living off my parents' faith at that point. And I went to the youth group and the conferences and, you know, I'd be like bawling my eyes out and not knowing why kind of thing. I'd be like really emotional and not knowing why. So I think like, you know, the stages of grief, you know, they're all great, but it's not linear. It's this like, you know, either like loop-de-loop or like circle but I feel like for me, like anger was always next to every stage that I was going through. That one just kind of like held on forever. And I can't say I'm angry anymore, I guess, which is good. Yeah, just, man, the anger's pops up when you least expect it to.
Yeah, it's very strong. One of my children is definitely struggling with that. You said something that I thought was really good, and that was that grief is active. Like you realized that grief was an active thing. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about what that meant to you?
So when I say that grief is active, it is not something that we're brought into automatically when there is a loss. It is not something that just happens. It's something that is, I don't want to get like cheesy, but it can be like a gift, like of something that, you know, I think it's necessary, but it's also active. Like it's there for you to reach out and grab and walk through. And, you know, no one's grading it, but you can do it well and you can do it poorly. And I've done it both ways over the same person or people, but it's not just going to happen. Or if it does, you stay in denial of yourself even grieving. So for me, like doing like the journaling and like reading and talking to my dad and talking to my sisters, that was really activating a lot of the stuff that I needed to go through, getting my questions answered. I remembered this, it was kind of cool. It wasn't even like when I was doing this with my therapist, but I mentioned to my sister, I remember one of the ladies from our church coming over to shave my mom's head because the hospital only shaved the part they needed to get out the tumor. So she had like this wild like mohawk on one side, and one of our like old church ladies came over and, you know, decided to, you know, like help her and, you know, shave her head, the rest of it for her. And I'm like, I remember like walking in the door and seeing that. And my sister's like, yeah, we came back too soon from the store. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, Mom told me to take you on a walk while she was getting that done. Like, I never had that piece of that story.
Yeah. Do you find yourself still having those pieces coming together?
Here and there, I'll remember things. It's not like I didn't have my sister's piece of the story, and I couldn't have, but just like that connection of like my mom caring for me while she was sick, because she was at our house for a while sick, and you know, I avoided being home a lot of the time. I had a really great friend that would let me go to their house, and I would stay there a lot because I just couldn't handle what was going on. Yeah, I have pieces that come back like every so often, just kind of like there's like a black hole, but like those pin lights coming through. And yeah, I'm hoping that I get more memories of that, because right now it's still like, I don't think it's anyone's like responsibility to fill that in. I just think there's memories that I've forgotten.
Yeah, I feel the same. I have family members that will like send me photos or and those bring those like trigger memories that I don't like recall without that photo, you know? And there's so few photos, I feel like, from because I mean, at that time, I don't think we took, well, first of all, at that time, we did not have iPhones where we just snap photos like, you know, of the food we eat or whatnot. But so like the photos are so few and far between. And they're also like living in like our family and friends, like basements that they haven't fished out in so long. So whenever they show me photos, and I feel like that's why I'm such a photo like maniac, because I just like never had any photos. And if I ever have two kids, there's going to be equal amounts of photos. You know, they always say like the first kid has loads of photos and the second has
all the albums.
Yeah, they're going to have equal amount. But it is one of those things where like those photos or like those stories really do help piece it together. And each sibling has different things that they remember and can be really powerful to like share that. You know, just like I always, even with my siblings to date, like when we talk about my dad ended up getting remarried after my mom died, and you know, so then that's like 6 kids under one roof, all different ages. And we all remember some of like the stories of growing up differently. You know, my sister said to me the other day, she's like cutting my hair, and I was like, do you remember this? And I was like, no. It's like, what are you talking about? But those can be so powerful to help you, just like you said, like know that even when your mom was going through that, she was caring about you. And it's something you know, but you don't know it until like those are like nice reminders, I think.
Yeah, definitely. To your photo point, I think like I went to school for photography, but I think that was like one of the things, like it was so important for me to capture memories. And like I think that's what like kind of spurred on like my career is in the photo industry. But we were very fortunate. My dad got a camcorder, like the messenger bag with the big thing, like in 1985 or 86 he got it, because he got it for my first birthday. So we have home videos. I have a ton of them. And a few years back, my brother-in-law, he put them all on disc for us, you know, and now we have all those that, you know, we can share. And you know, I was saying how like my sisters and I, we don't really do anything to remember my mom like every year collectively, but my husband always asks like around the holidays and stuff to like bring out the home videos and watch them with me.
That's awesome.
That's so nice.
Yeah, we did. I started documenting as much as I could when Ariana got sick. And then in hospice, I hired a photographer to come and do hospice photos for us. Wow. Knowing that we would want those.
Yeah.
Those are so powerful.
Yeah, they hurt to look at, but I'm really glad we have them.
Yeah. That would be. We have a couple images from when my mom was sick. She looked so different by the time, because she was like on a ton of steroids and everything, and you know, she looks so very different from, you know, what she did and what I knew of her as.
Yeah. So when you were talking about grief, it feels like to you, the way you were describing it is that grief is a verb, not a noun. you were talking about how it's like a gift for us to go get or to do versus like, so I'm wondering like, how do you view like somebody has a loss versus somebody has grief?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the grief part of it, I think anyone can have loss. Everyone loses, you know, stuff, situations or people or relationships or whatever it is. I think the grieving part of it is saying that you are looking for that healing within the loss.
Right.
So I think it's like activating the healing that is there for us if we go after it. And I mean that process can be, you know, months or years or whatever it is. You know, little kids will lose a hamster and be over it in like a week or less, and you know that's well and good. But you know, for the more serious situations, yeah, it's activating and moving towards healing. That's what I see grief as, rather than just loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I think it was Kelly, maybe our second guest, who mentioned like she had a very delayed grief response.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this definition that she kind of laid out is really in line with that of like, we have that loss and we act out however we act out because of that loss, you know, it's significant loss. But then grieving comes to that healing part. What did you, so you talked about you did journaling,
Mm-hmm.
you've obviously did therapy, and you've been on this, I'm assuming, for quite a while now. What are the things that you do or did early on that you found a lot of success in
Mm-hmm.
with coping and with, you know, using your definition with grieving
Yeah.
and getting through that?
So I talked about it, whether people were ready to receive that or not. And, you know, grief is, it can feel very selfish, I think, when you go through it. It can
Yeah.
be feel very self-serving. But you're getting yourself better for the people around you so that you can, you know, be that father or be that wife or whatever it is. So for me, I talked about it to people or at people, whether it was in therapy or whether there's something like, I'm like, I just need to ask you this one question, or, you know, and I'm a sharer, I'm an oversharer to that point. And, you know, like talking about it was the best thing I could do. I'm like, hey, I know this happened 20 years ago, but, you know, this Christmas, like, I want to do something special. Like, I want to talk about this. And it made people uncomfortable. People don't really know what to do when someone's grieving. You know, a lot of people try to find the right words, and, you know, it's just kind of like, no, just be there, receive what I'm saying. You don't have to put a silver lining on it. Please don't put a silver lining on it. There is no silver lining to this that I can recognize. So, just receive what I'm saying. So yeah, speaking about it out loud really, really helped. Just remembering, just getting information. When I asked my dad, I asked him specifics. I'm like, I don't know if she died a year or a year and a half after she got sick, or 6 months. I'm like, I don't know if there was a year in between there or not. I just cannot remember. I think it's 6 months, but I don't know. And I asked him like specifics. I'm like, what kind of cancer was it? And like having all the facts that I didn't have, or they didn't think I was old enough to have when I was younger. Because there was a lot of, I felt like stuff being withheld from me, to protect me. Everyone was doing their best and, wanting to protect me and my sisters. But I also still never grew up with those answers. So, like seeking out those answers and getting them, and, finding peace for the ones that I haven't gotten.
Do you remember having conversations like when she first got sick, or was it you kind of started to see her get sick? Or
Yeah. So I remember we all sat down as a family, and these are my memories. So if my sisters listen to this and like, that's not how it happened, it might not have been, because brain's a little mush after your mom dies. So,
Yeah.
I remember sitting down as a family though, and, saying, the doctors found, a mass in mom's head, and, we're going to get it checked out. And, we're going to do all the steps. And I remember specifically them telling us, they're like, don't believe anything you hear unless it comes from us. And that was really important, because there started to be rumors going around, because people didn't have information. At one point, I heard that my mom was in a coma from someone, which was never the case.
Yeah, because you were at that point, like you were in high school. So I think it's right. Well, you were in middle school, and your sisters were in high school and college. Was that, or was it family? Like, was it going around in your family?
No, it was kind of like church stuff. Like I grew up in a small town, so
community.
Yeah, so it was teachers would ask like how my mom's doing, and sometimes I didn't have that information. I remember my science teacher would be like, "How's your mom doing?" It was like the day before winter break, and she, died over winter break, and I'm like, "She's fine," because like I didn't know what to say.
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
I don't. Yeah. First of all, I don't want to cry in middle school. That is like the worst thing, besides like getting your pants pulled down in gym. Like I don't want to like be the crying kid. I don't want to get upset. I have to go to another class, and so I kind of like I kept it in, because I also didn't want to be treated any differently.
Yeah. I was a little bit younger, but I feel like I remember feeling the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't even really remember I don't ever remember the conversation of her being sick.
Yeah.
I just remember her back hurting and then like hair falling out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, but I like trust that my dad definitely told me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just like, for some reason, I don't compute that he didn't not tell me, but I don't recall him sitting me down and telling me.
I do remember some conversation. I don't know if it was put in the words that like, this is terminal, but I remember the conversation that was supposed to mean that. And I don't know what words were said. I just remember like we were in the living room. I remember my mom wasn't in the room. She was in a different room. And I remember all of us coming in to her room after that. And she was like on the couch. And by that time, a lot of her like functioning, just her, like she would say stuff, but it wouldn't come out the way she would want to say it. And I remember us like crying and hugging her. And she looked at my dad. She's like, "What's wrong?" Like didn't know really what was going on. And he goes, your children just love you. That's all he said. And she like was trying to comfort us. And she's like, and like she knew who we were, but in that moment it felt like she didn't, because she was like, "Oh, it's okay." She goes, "I love all my children." And like it was just something that always like stuck with me.
Yeah, I remember the night we told the kids that it was like not going to be much longer. We were always honest with them about what was going on. It'll be interesting to hear years later what they remember, what they don't. But we were always like, "Hey, this is what's happening. This is what's going on." But I remember the night when I actually have a photo of it. I took a photo when we told the kids, and we thought she'd get through Christmas. She died in September. Like, I think it was like 2 weeks after we told them. So, but yeah, it was the same thing. We cried. We all held each other, and then just kind of moved on. But I've been thinking about this. Something that I'm envious of is how you've been able to go and have these conversations and not care that it feels selfish in these weird ways. Because for me, like, my grief completely isolated me. I've always been kind of like this outsider, kind of lone wolf anyways. And then this happened and I was like, oh, I don't fit in at all anymore, except for people like in this community. And it became such a personal thing to me where like now I grieve on my own, or I grieve with like, my uncle, her dad, stuff like that. So you had this experience right away of this adult. And then you said it made you think like, oh, grief isn't supposed to be a big deal. How did you carry that through all those years and then finding yourself being like, okay, I'm going to just do this anyways and find my healing? Like, did you feel some sense of isolation? Did you feel some sense of like, people just don't get it and I'm angry at you and it's frustrating, just leave me alone? Like, what was that emotion that surrounded that and how it evolved into what it is today?
In one respect, I took death very lightly if they were a Christian, because of what I was told. They're like, they're in heaven, that's fine. I was like, okay, like that's, then they're better off. Then, it's fine. Then it's like all these like tropes, which I don't believe anymore. But like, I remember even like into my 20s, like a friend of the family, like lost a baby. I'm like, and I couldn't like, I didn't have a proper reaction to it. Like, that is a terrible thing. But it was like, I remember just having like a nonchalant reaction to it. And I was like, that's not a, like, looking back on it now, I'm like, that was terrible. But I was taught to grieve like that. I was taught that, if they're in heaven, they're okay. And that's that. In one respect, I took death kind of lightly and grief kind of lightly because I didn't know how to. I didn't know the seriousness of it. And also I felt like no one was taking mine seriously. So it was just the math of that. And in another way, I don't think I wanted to be understood in my grief. I wanted it to be special to me. And I didn't want anyone else involved. And I didn't, it was so diminished by like on the outside, but on the inside, like it was so big that no one else had the right to know what that feels like because it was biggest to me.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. How has it changed now?
It is a little bit of a masochist, but I really like grieving. I've come to not enjoy, but just helping people through their grief. At my church, I helped this past year run a group called Divorce Care. It's like a nationwide program, but we have it at our church. And people who are recently divorced come in and we go through 13 weeks and we go through the grief and the loss of that relationship. And I really like that people show up to their grief, and I love helping them through it. And I really love telling people that they have their permission to grieve and have that look like whatever it's going to look like, because it looks so different day to day. And I don't think I knew that. I thought you kind of had to like set your grief up in the beginning and like just go with that. Like, you're going to be the person that says, but God is good in your grief, and that's going to be you for the rest of your life. And now I'm like, no, this sucks, and this is real, and this is true. And yeah, my feelings don't rule my life, but this is terrible, and it can be terrible.
Yeah.
So I'd say I'm more of a realist about grief now than I was taught to be.
How has that changed your relationship to the external world? Right. So like you mentioned, grief was like this big thing to you and diminishing outwardly, which because society has no idea how to handle it. But like, how has your relationship now changed, especially being so involved with grief with other people?
Man, it feels like people need this so much, like the podcast you guys are doing, but just talking about grief and all the facets of it. I've just seen such a need for it that people either haven't allowed themselves to grieve or think they're doing it wrong or are trying to hide it. And, grief is really messy. It is, you just, yeah, it's gross a lot of the times. Yeah. And it's, it's hard to keep it private. It's hard to not let it affect every single part of your life when that person affected every single part of your life. And I think we ask that of people to, compartmentalize it and, get back to your job, get back to, raising your kids, get back to that. Well, there's just this thing just hanging there. So I think I'm, my relationship with it is that, it's good and it's necessary to go through. But it's also dark and terrible. And I think it can be both. I don't think it's either or. I think it's amazing, and I think it's the worst thing ever.
And so we do a speed round at the end, just like a really lighthearted, fun thing. And usually we ask, like, what's the one thing you want to leave with people? I feel like that one thing has everything that you just said, right? Yeah. It's like, that's everything in a nutshell. Grief is messy and it takes over your entire life. And society asks us to compartmentalize it. Like, that is so well said. But I will ask, is there any one thing that you would want to leave with people who are going through this?
Give yourself a lot of grace while you're grieving. Don't be hard on yourself for how it comes out. People are really, really forgiving when they know you're going through something. And yeah, the amount of time that you're going through something is going to be tenfold compared to how other people see it or treat it. And you're allowed that amount of time. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's grief.
My reaction to that is anger. I have a very hard time giving myself grace. It's the one thing that I've been like actively trying to work through. Because I definitely took on the identity of like, okay, I'm the single widow dad. I'm going to do it all and fuck everybody else. Yeah, I'm the window dad. No, the widow dad. And like, I can do it all and I can handle my grief. And I've been, dealing with this for years and like walking Ariana through her cancer. Mm-hmm. I could do it. Yeah. Just leave me alone. And then I beat myself up.
Yeah. It's, that's a hard feeling to shake, is not needing to feel strong in that, especially when you have kids. And I saw my dad do that. I think he probably would have served us better as a father if he just didn't try so hard to keep it together.
Yeah. No, I hear that. Man. All right.
Is there we should say if there's anything else that Ashely wanted to cover today in telling her story, or is there anything we didn't cover?
No, I think that's all it. Somehow I found my way like back to God and my faith through all this, even though like I still deal with grief. And that's been a really great thing and a really weird thing, because I feel like it can go one of two ways when, you experience a loss. Because there's a lot of disappointment in who you thought God was when stuff like that happens. So relearning my faith has been very interesting in the last few years.
Would you say it's more grounded now?
Yeah, I would say it's my own. I would say it's definitely more educated, definitely more grounded, definitely a lot messier, a lot more shades of gray than there has ever been.
Yeah.
If anyone tells you that God's black and white, I wouldn't trust it. Yeah. There's a lot of room for error and a lot of grace there. So yeah, it's been good.
I think I was every interview, every discussion, I hate calling it an interview, has just like gone in such unique ways. And I think it's great that we really dug into like grief and experiencing grief and not experiencing grief and not going through grief and going back to it so many years later. Yeah, so thank you so much for that. It's really great.
Yeah, this is really enlightening. Like, I feel like we could probably talk for hours. Like, I don't even think we scratched the surface of your story. But yeah, thank you for coming on. We're going to do this lightning round. And Ashely's going to go first.
Is it wrong for a vegetarian to eat animal crackers?
Only if they're not the pink iced ones with the sprinkles. Yeah. That's wrong for anyone to eat.
Yeah, those are
the best.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about those. Aren't they like the circus
they have
ones
like
or something?
A little kind of like almost like ridge around it, so the frosting like sinks into it and like holds right there. It's so good.
Yeah, those are.
Let's see. Place you want to travel most.
I want to go to Iceland. I want to see the Northern Lights so bad. I have a friend that's there right now, and she like sent me a picture. I'm like, how dare you? She did ask me to go with her, but I couldn't go.
Are you a Harry Potter fan?
Yeah.
If Voldemort offered you a hug, would you accept?
Oh no, I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it.
Have you ever slapped someone in the face?
I don't think so. Maybe my sister's in like a fight when we were young. We used to be on the couch and our feet faced towards each other and our heads were like at the armrest and we just like kick.
Oh, let's see. Most embarrassing store you might be seen shopping at?
I don't know. I'm not easily embarrassed. Yeah, I was gonna say something like Wegmans. No, I love a thrift shop, so I'm always in there with a massive amount of stuff.
All right, last one. Let's see. What type of milk do you put in your cereal?
Vanilla unsweetened almond milk.
Oh, good choice. Good choice.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast.